There we go. I'd like to introduce Dr. Karl Maret, and we're very excited to have him here today to discuss the quality of water, and he looks at it from a holistic viewpoint, which is exciting to all of us. So, Dr. Maret?
Well, thank you very much, Maria and Corey, for inviting me to your meeting. I know you're hopefully will soon have the approval of the people in the Soquel Creek Water District who are really being affected by the decisions made over the last cycle by the current board to establish this pure so-called pure water, and I put that pure in quotation marks because to me, just having chemically pure water that meets the so-called regulatory standards, when you're looking at it as a physician and somebody concerned with people's health, there are a lot of factors that you have to consider, including can you test for all the issues that are ongoing? And that includes not only pollutants, but also disinfecting agents and chemicals. And just like in drugs, when a doctor gives you several drugs or polypharmacy, a lot of times, none of these drugs have been studied how they interact with each other. And we see this a lot in older patients who different doctors have given different drugs to, each for their own indications, but they've never been studied how they might be influencing the person when they all work together, and that's a real problem in many cases. So the same thing when you purify water with different disinfecting technologies or purification technologies, what comes out may be chemically pure by certain standards, but it is not necessarily energetically pure, and by that I'll explain that a little bit, how I look at water towards the end of my talk. And I think if I can share my screen with all of you, then I will share a short presentation that also gives some of the scientific background, what I'm talking about, if that's okay. So am I allowed to share that?
Yes, I allowed it.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Okay, so I think I put that on now. Here's my screen. Here's my presentation. We're going to go start this at the beginning, and I'll make that big so we can see that. Okay, so I don't know if I can make it bigger here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so my background, just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. I first started studying electrical engineering in Canada when I started my academic career, and then I got a master's in biomedical engineering, and I developed equipment and also served in the Canadian military doing research for the Canadian Defense Research Board. I was a captain in the Air Force, and after that I went back to go to medical school, also in Canada, and got my MD degree in '77. And then I came to the United States after graduating, and I actually ended up doing a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of California in San Diego, where I was part of the American Medical Research Expedition that climbed Mount Everest in 1981, and I developed all the instrumentation we took to Mount Everest, and we had a very successful expedition with 7 people getting to the summit, and we wrote at least 35 research papers. And so that's sort of my academic career, and since then I went back and studied integrative medicine, or at that time was called complementary and alternative medicine. So I come to this whole idea of water from the perspective of that our body is mostly made out of water. In fact, as I'll show you, we're 99% water molecules. It's the most abundant molecule in our body. And so the water that we drink and the water that we get from our wastewater treatment plant that might be recycled or that's purified, you know, has to fulfill a lot of energetic qualities, because when we work in this sort of expanded field of what I call energy medicine, that's what actually the National Institutes of Health call it, where we're interested in the energetic interactions, and we want to understand what water is. Water, can really only be understood from the perspective of quantum physics. And unfortunately, most water boards and so on are only concerned with the chemical nature or even the physics nature of water, but the true understanding of the anomalies of properties of water can really only be understood from quantum physics. And I'll show you a little bit of that at the end. But when we start looking at the problem of reusing water, we have to start looking at some of the problems. And one of the major problems is that there aren't enough federal regulations as yet for the water that we use. And in addition to that, one should be concerned when we recycle water about opportunistic pathogens. I'll show you what those are and why those are important. In addition to that, there's many bacteria that are becoming antibiotic resistant. And this is a problem because there's so much antibiotics being prescribed that these organisms which live in our body, these bacteria that are often part of our microbiome in the gut, exchange DNA and RNA and communication molecules of their genetics. And they, of course, are also interested in surviving. And so, this antibiotic resistance is a big problem. And then in addition, that when you just study water from a pure bacterial perspective, like coliform bacteria and so on, they may not really give you indicators of some of these other opportunistic pathogens that I'll show you. And then there's the whole process of purification by means of disinfecting, and some of these have carcinogenic byproducts, and we don't have enough health regulations for all of these things yet. This is an ongoing process in the regulatory agencies to find out what should be watched for, what should be notified, and ultimately what are the maximum contaminant levels that should be adopted to help in public health keep our population safe. And I'm going to also talk about some of these energetic effects, even if you purified it to a level that might be sufficient to meet regulatory standards as they exist. And remember, these regulatory standards are evolving continuously. You may still cause a lot of problems that are unforeseen later on down the road. And especially if you then take this purified water that may still have all kinds of things in it that you're not testing for, ending up in groundwater, which is a very living substance. The water in the ground is not just pure H2O. There's a lot of other factors that can interact, and there's a lot of micronutrients, and there can be a lot of micropollutants, and they can build up over time, because if you just put a little bit into the lake or into the underground aquifer or whatever way you're storing the water, this stuff can, snowball, accumulate over time. And at that point, you really have to test all of this, which costs the ratepayers a lot of money. So when we think about adopting this approach to our water supply and ultimately to our healthcare system, we should really think in a systemic or whole systems way. So if you want to understand the Safe Drinking Water Act that the EPA has said, well, they say they don't have to monitor for more than 30 unregulated contaminants. There's also new contaminants, because there's so many things coming potentially into the water supply. I mean, there is, 80,000, 100,000 chemicals and new ones coming in every year. And regulatory agencies really can't keep up with that. So we also don't know here in Santa Cruz, where we're supposed to be getting the water from the city, the effluent water from the wastewater treatment plant, which is the source water for the Soquel PureWater Project. What kind of tertiary treatments will they be using to provide a water that can be then purified according to this program. And, you know, for full disclosure, I'm not a big friend of the Soquel Water Project. I just want to say, not my bias, but my concern, because I wrote several things about that when the environmental review process was taking place, but they made fairly short shrift of that. And so I want to repeat that again here. So if you want to find out, and I'll make this small PowerPoint available to whoever wants it, you can go to the waterboardscalifornia.gov, and they basically have a whole report here called Constituents of Emerging Concern. It's fairly recent, from 2018, and these are the people who wrote that report. And here's what they say that they're concerned about, that we really aren't testing for enough, but you know, it's been found through science that these things are there. And they include personal care products and pharmaceuticals, of course, industrial runoff, agricultural runoff, the hormones. A lot of people are taking man-made hormones or natural hormones even, but these things end up in the urine, and they sometimes end up also in the stool. And so these things then get into the water supply. And food additives, there are so many food additives that are now, some are safe, some are not so safe. There's estrogens that are from plants called phytoestrogens, you know, there's sweeteners and caffeine. So there's all these things end up in the water supply. And then there's transformation products as these interact. There's nanomaterials, very small particle materials. They're millionth or even billionth of a size that are getting in nanotechnology now, also being released in the water. There's microplastics getting to be a real problem in the oceans. And then, of course, this issue that I mentioned of antibiotic resistance. So you can find this report here, and these are notification levels of 31 different substances, and at what level they have to notify the government. And that's all in that report. Some of these have a lot of zeros in them, like you can see here, NDEA, and they have all long chemical names. That's not important. What's important is to see that some of these things have to be reported when they're a millionth of a part, you know, milligrams per liter. Milligram is already a thousandth of a liter. And then some of these, you know, are basically a billionth of a gram in a liter because they're so potent as carcinogens and so on. So here's an example from that same report where it says, okay, these couple of things, and they were on the last slide, these are the chemicals, some are just called RDX, other ones TBA is a tertiary butyl alcohol, it's an organic substance. And you know, the response level is given here when they should inform the government, so they have to do more testing then. But the bottom line is, you know, not all of these have a maximum contaminant level assigned to it yet, because they're either new or they haven't decided how dangerous they are. And out of the 93 chemicals for which notification levels have been established, less than half of them have maximum contaminant levels assigned to them. So, you know, this is important to recognize that this is a work in progress. Now, this is a really great paper from 2016 by Garnett et al. In environmental science, and it's basically about the challenges of recycled water quality, you know, creating a human exposome, that's a name that says what are the environmental influences, what's the framework that guides the risk and management for a real holistic assessment of recycled water quality. And I want to refer to a little bit to this. So there's the reference down below where you can find it in the Journal of Environmental Science and Water Resource Technology. So an exposome, as I mentioned, is everything that affects us from the climate, and that's of course a big topic, but specifically the water, food, and air quality that obviously have an effect on health. And then of course how these factors interact internally to create our metabolism, how we, the bacteria that are in our lungs or especially in the microbiome in the gut. You know, we have about 4 pounds of bacteria in the gut. You could say there's 10 times as many bacteria in our gut, in our GI tract, as there are cells in our body. So you can see this is huge. And these microbes interact, and many of them are beneficial, producing vitamins and so on, but they do get influenced by water quality. So water is really the fundamental component that we all must consume every day. And if the water isn't of the right quality, or we're not testing for it, that can be a problem. So here's an example from one paper from the Science of the Total Environment paper from 2016 that just gives you an idea what should be tested for as general categories. And it's like, what I want to show you here is that when water comes from a reclaimed water source, it may have a lot more dissolved organic nitrogen in it, which is like a food supply for certain bacteria and other things. The carbon, the assimilatable organic carbon, that's this category here. The dissolved organic carbon up here. And water, has also xenoactivity. Xenoestrogens are estrogens that are synthetic that do affect pregnant mothers. They do affect women in their hormone balance and so on. And has been recognized to be a real problem, the estrogenic activity. And then there are these other compounds, the total haloacetic acid formation potential. These are substances that you get from chlorination or from other chemical treatment. The names right now aren't important, but we want to just say there's a lot of things you got to look for when you even start the water. And in the end, you want to end up with these 6 categories having a very low level, like these blue triangles in the center here. So we need to monitor that, and how much money you have to monitor all this, of course, is very important. And when we do something totally new, like PureWater is planning to do with a whole new process, then this is an even more important thing to test for all these things that weren't there if you just took surface water, which is relatively pure already and may just have dissolved organic material in it that can be filtered out or treated. The important thing about this exposome, the amount of environmental contamination, is this is what triggers our genetics. We call this epigenetic modulation, how your genes are turned on and off by environmental factors, everything from your diet to exercise to the water you drink, okay? And when we take purified water and put it in the groundwater basin, as I mentioned, these micro constituents that may be there at very low levels, even though they pass each month that you do this water recharge into the aquifer, they can build up over time. And so they have to really keep checking that. And that, of course, costs a lot of money, too. And most of the treatment plants aren't designed with the intention of removing micronutrients. Especially these pharmaceuticals or these personal care products, or well, heavy metals. You saw cadmium there and vanadium, but they may not be checking, the mercury that's up there, and nanomaterials and so forth. And then there's this part that I want to share at the end. Even though they may be chemically removed at a low enough level to pass the current standards, there may be still an energetic or homeopathic effect. And homeopathy, you dilute things to a very low level. In some cases, they're not even atoms present anymore, but they still can affect the body. This is science that's 200 years old. And even though it's not part of standard medicine, allopathic Western medicine, it is a great part of integrative medicine. So here's an example of pharmaceutical residues in treated water, a paper from 2009. And they basically say here, there is a good agreement between what we call predicted environmental concentrations, then what is also called measured environmental concentration. So once you measure it, you can predict it. And there is quite a bit of pharmacy that goes down the toilet and into the water supply. And you really got to test a whole bunch of these chemicals if you want to be safe. Now, some of these things that we're concerned about is especially that bacteria that are being treated and then perhaps somewhat destroyed, but some of their genes, what we call antibiotic resistant genes from these bacteria, could end up in the water supply and still help create greater antibiotic resistance. And there aren't yet standardized method for their quantification. And you can see this directly from the CEC, the Scientific Advisory Board for Emerging Contaminants. So here's a study, for example, that shows in 15 different wastewater treatment plants that recycled water, there are antibiotic were found in of the 20 most common antibiotics were found at elevated concentrations in recycled water, and even when it was added to groundwater. You can see even this number, which might be something like 10 times less, or even 4 times less at the higher concentration, still ends up in groundwater. So you really want to start testing this antibiotic resistant potential in your groundwater. And then I talked earlier about these opportunistic pathogens. Now these are often bacteria that don't go in through the gastrointestinal tract, which is the most common way when we get it. If you have food poisoning or if you drink bad water, you can get all kinds of GI distress or diseases. But some of these can come in if you have these in shower water and you breathe in the aerosol from particles in shower water. If they have these bacteria in them, these all come in to the host through lung inhalation, and they can be funguses like Aspergillus or Mycobacterium or Legionella organisms or Acinetobacter bacteria and so on. And just to show you how important this is, a lot of these are resistant to disinfection by chlorine or the normal things. In fact, they can be resistant at a level of 21 to almost 658 times as resistant. So you'd have to use huge amounts of chemicals just to get rid of them, assuming they're there. And of course, you have to test for them. So these pathogens are a problem. And there's also a category of these called oligotrophic bacteria, basically nutrients, bacteria that grow in nutrient deficient environments, okay? And here's a journal from the Journal of Clinical Microbiology from 1995 that says, you know, you find these in supposedly sterile urine or sputum or throat swabs, vaginal discharge, and so on. So they grow with very little nutritional support, and yet they're found in all these materials. So these organisms can reside in the distribution system. They can reside inside the pipes and so forth, you know. And even if you destroyed them like they're planning to do in the Soquel Soquel Creek PureWater Project, by ultraviolet, which of course breaks them apart by high energy light, ultraviolet light. There can still be fragments of DNA and RNA, and they can still have a potential to affect our gut microbiome. There just are not enough studies done in California, because this is a relatively new thing with the water shortage that they're starting to do this. I think there's a water project, they always quote how wonderful it is in Southern California, and I used to live there, but I don't think they've done enough long-term studies what that water in the recharge of their aquifers is doing long-term. So this is all very novel technology. And so these antibiotic resistant genes may end up in our distribution pipes. You know, they may have chlorine resistance, they may share their DNA, they may be cysts of amoebas that are basically forms that haven't yet become active life forms as amoebas and so on. And so I'm very concerned about that unless we really have a whole systems view of looking at that. And then there's the whole thing about viruses, right? Viruses are much smaller particles. You need an electron microscope to see them. You know, currently we have an epidemic supposedly of these COVID-19 organisms. I say supposedly because it's being analyzed through a test that's called polymerase chain reaction test, where you amplify segments of genetic code that were supplied by the Chinese. And the people who developed the PCR test even said, well, you know, this test should not be used for identification of viruses. There's really no gold standard, but everybody's being tested. And we do know that even when tested, this COVID-19 organism shows up in people's stool. and goes through the body and ends up in the wastewater, okay? So that's a big concern this year, where we seemingly have COVID causing all these problems. Now, the viruses that we have a lot of are bacteriophages. These are small viral organisms that basically are used to shuffle genetic code between bacteria. Okay, and there are a lot of these, and that's the vast majority of viruses, and they're both in potable and recycled waters. And they have a big role to play in sharing genetic information that might make us antibiotic resistant. And so here's a paper just to illustrate that from 2016, again recent. How much reduction of virus is needed for recycled water? And the basic answer was, well, this is a continuously changing need to assess this. This not yet all figured out. Next year we might need to test at 10 times the sensitivity level and so forth, okay? So another paper that says, you know, there's 100 billion virus-like particles in a milliliter of reclaimed water, and that may play a role in dissemination of highly stable viruses. So one has to look at a lot of data here to say, okay, are we really screening for that? Is it even feasible? And when we use recycled water, do we test for all these things to make sure it's safe, especially when we put it into the nice, healthy water that nature has provided in the groundwater basin? Now I'm going to switch a little bit from the chemistry side just to talk for a few minutes about water and water molecules and some of the informational quality that water has. You know, water molecules are what's called dipoles, meaning they have a charged hydrogen end that's positively charged and a negatively charged oxygen end. So they act like a little battery, as it were, or they attract each other. So the hydrogen, as you can see, attracts the oxygen. And if you just took a single tiny water molecule, there's usually always four water molecules in the tetrahedral structure around it, because that stabilizes the charge distribution. Now, when you have many more water molecules, they form these clusters, and these clusters are, you know, between the hydrogen and the oxygen end, and they can be very complex geometrical structures. And they create in quantum physics a sort of a resonance that literally can be found out there, specific frequencies or information that's literally stored in the water. And knowing that our body is mostly water, as I said, 99% of the molecules in your body are water. Of course, by weight or by volume, it's about 60 to 70%, depending on what your age is. But you see the fluid in the eye is almost all water. The lymphatic, which brings back the fluid that goes back to the heart when it leaks out at the capillary level, is 95%. Blood plasma is 92% water. The rest, of course, are the dissolved electrolytes and the dissolved red blood cells, white blood cells, and so on. But even your brain is 94% water. Your nerves are 70% water. Even your bone is almost 30% water. And you know, you have to remember that this water streams through our body. In 24 hours, there's almost 1,500 liters. A liter is roughly a quart of water flowing through your brain. And I can tell you, in my clinical advisement of patients, I see lots of people who are having real problems now, and I'll show you some other reasons for that, with their brain not functioning well, not sleeping well, fatigue, memory issues, and so on. And I'll show you some reasons for that. But the liver and the spleen and the kidney and even the nerves are mostly water, and the water has to flow through them and flush out the toxins and so on. And if you lose 10% of your body water, you're at great risk for heart attack or strokes. At 20%, you will die. So we need to stay hydrated. And if you don't have good water quality, people won't drink it. So here's an example how body water decreases with age. Babies have the highest amount, as you can see here, almost 80% water in their body by volume. And then it goes down at age 9 and you know, consistently. And then for men, as testosterone comes in and puberty happens, the males have more muscle mass, so they store a lot of water in their muscles. But for women, it goes down all the time. And so, you know, when we see a lot of obesity, and in this country, 2/3 of people are overweight or obese, that's often a water deficiency. You know, we see that very commonly. So staying hydrated is a real key thing. Now, I talked just briefly, and I'm not going to go into this very much. I just wanted to tell you what water is like at the cellular level, what we call coherence. And this is a principle that protein molecules, every protein molecule in your body, has to stay hydrated with water. And it's the water around the protein that creates a certain shape or conformation that makes the enzymes and the structural proteins in your body work. And there's this hydrogen bonding pattern I showed you earlier that breaks at a rate faster than your computers work, at literally a terahertz rate. Picoseconds is like 10 to the 12th, 1/10 to the 12th. So that's basically at a terahertz rate. The same frequencies that the scanners at the airport work. They work as terahertz scanners. And the water is constantly readjusting itself inside your body. And the body works on light inside the body. And that's that light in your body, which is called biophotons, operates as a communication system in your body through the electromagnetic processes. And so if you start with water in the atmosphere and it starts to condense down into a liquid level from moisture, let's say the fog in the atmosphere, which incidentally, I think we could get a lot of water out of the atmosphere with all the fog in Aptos and so on, if we could, you know, basically precipitate that water, and there's technologies to do that. We could use that to recharge rather than just surface water, but that's another topic. Anyway, if we look at this water, it starts to create these coherent domains. As I said, you see these water setting up, and then as it gets more and more coherent, there are these small, you might say, areas or containers, domains inside the cell water that trap electromagnetic radiation and use it to use light and other forms of electromagnetic radiation to communicate inside the cell. And that water is basically bound to all the structures, like there is a scaffolding in the cell called a microtubule, and all the water around here has a unique surface charge. It has a very different electrical property and chemical property than the water that's just inside the rest of the cell, which we call bulk water. So the whole body communicates through water at the cellular level. And when molecular vibrations or electromagnetic radiation come into the cell from all the cell phones and cell towers and your Wi-Fi and all the meters, including the water meters that Aptos has installed on all the lines, they constantly pulse into the water, and they do affect the water in a subtle way. Whether that's highly significant hasn't been studied yet, but that technology is out there. So what I'm saying is these water domains inside the body receive electromagnetic radiation that's ubiquitous or all around us in the environment. They affect the water clusters inside the cells that are part of the communication system at the cell on a quantum physical level. And we're basically information processing system. And now we have all these technologies. We're now working on 5G, which is being installed. And you've heard all of these things. Nobody has studied the health effect of electromagnetic radiation on water. And that's why I'm really concerned about it, because you should study health things when you introduce new technologies. We've known about that in the military already in the 70s, how this was affecting us. This is just a report from the Naval Medical Research Institute with 2,300 references. The military knows very well, and I served in the military, that electromagnetic radiation affects our body, affects our water, affects our cells, affects our tissues like the eyes and so on. So, you know, what I'm concerned about is all of this in the environment. There's things that are near you, like your cell phone or cordless phones, and there are things that are being radiated from your cell towers and your Wi-Fi in your home with all these antennas and so forth. So, and from a water perspective, you know, we're using a kind of smart meter on the water meters that have been installed on the water coming into your house, and it's hard to opt out of those. And here's what 5G will look like soon. There'll be antennas, you know, every 100 meters or 300 feet or even closer, and all the different carriers will have them, so your whole neighborhood will be blanketed with electromagnetic radiation. Now, water absorbs 70% of electromagnetic radiation in the atmosphere, and as I showed you also in our cells. And, you know, this goes from a whole range from megahertz or millions of cycles a second to, you know, very high things where they actually interact with the atomic nuclei of water. And we can't really understand this until we apply quantum physics, not just chemistry, to the body. And finally, I just want to show you a picture. In Germany, they have a technique where they look at water quality in a qualitative way, not a quantitative way, and they crystallize water. And when it's healthy water, it crystallizes in like a snowflake pattern, in a hexagonal pattern. But when you expose that water to electromagnetic radiation, then it crystallizes at right angles like this. It's a fractal structure, and you can very quickly say whether these subtle energetic qualities have affected water in a way that it's hard for the body to assimilate it in its cells. So that gives you kind of a visual picture that water isn't the same just because you've purified it. You have to look at a lot of factors. And thank you so much for listening to that. Okay, I will now stop the share so we can all, so you may have some questions about that.
So
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Corey.
Doctor, I'd like to ask a question. If you were to use the recycled water for landscaping, medians, and parks, is that safe to do it for that?
Yes, because I believe it's safe. And, you know, surface water distribution, we do need the water. We do need to recycle it, and gray water systems work like this. The soil itself is a whole active filtration system with its own bacteria. I mean, Mother Nature, you know, constantly purifies things, and by the time it goes down into the groundwater, it's done a lot of purification steps. So you can certainly do that, and I would advocate that. We need to preserve as much water and recycle it in that way. We just don't need to purify it chemically and inject it in there if there's another way to do it effectively.
That's one of the things that we're pushing for, is getting on the board, is alternate projects that have better benefit. So using the aquifer, what it's intended for, domestic use, using recycled water where we can in parks and medians, thereby reducing the overdraft.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm a big friend of sharing. You know, water from a more energetic perspective is always communicating. All the water molecules share each other. This is a fundamental principle in quantum physics, that everything is talking to everything else, and everything is connected. It's called what's called quantum entanglement. So, you know, water should be shared, it should be purified, it should have a spiritual, and you might say energetic reverence, as well as a use resonance, which of course is what we do. But in all my years of studying water, and I've given lectures about it in Europe and here, what I constantly see is everybody's associated with water often is more separative than other things, and water should connect us. So I can't understand why so many water districts and each saying it's my own domain. There should be more sharing, because water wants to be shared. You know, it's a fundamental principle. And so there's a lot of ego involved, even though we are all made out of water. Somebody once said, you know, we took incarnation in order to carry water around on the planet and make good use of it. That's what our bodies are. You know, we are walking water machines, as it were.
Not machines, but walking water.
Yeah.
Dr. Maret, I have a question for you. So
Sure.
you said that the UV light breaks up the bacteria into fragments, and there's DNA from those organisms still in the water. Now, there's also another process that the PureWater Project is going to be using, which would be reverse osmosis. Does that clean it up to a sufficient level?
Well, you know, that all depends on the membranes that you use. Basically, you're putting water under high pressure, through a series of pores that are in the membranes, right? That's reverse. And it creates kind of a dead water. See, water wants to flow, and if you created such a system, you want to reorganize it by vortexing the water, by basically creating a flow that creates a kind of a tornado action. That re-energizes the water in a way that it supplies life energy. That's in some ways what's happening. Not only is the planet heating, but we have a lot more hurricanes and tornadoes. That's actually nature's way of regenerating the water that then falls, having been purified through these centrifugal forces. So if I were to build a water plant like they did in the city I was born in Germany, in Hamburg, they actually had these vortex systems installed in their wastewater treatment plant. But coming back to your question about the nature of reverse osmosis, there are still things that get through there, ions and other things like that. And, you know, not only is everything purified just coming out of there, things come back in when they get in contact. And there's also such a thing as sharing information. If things are in the pipes that haven't been cleaned out, or bacteria and so on, you have, and viruses, they can still energetically create a resonance in the water in the way I've showed you, that it's still, that water contains some kind of information. That, of course, is never studied because people who are physical chemists or chemical engineers and so on really don't believe this is even possible. But I know this is possible from understanding homeopathy and how subtle energies are transferred between water molecules. For example, this was studied back in Russia, where they found this light, these biophotons, and you can shine light from a culture of healthy cells through an optical window that has quartz in it, not normal glass like in your window panes, but quartz glass, which lets ultraviolet light come through the quartz. And you can have a cell culture that is diseased, and just through the light, it can influence the cell culture that is healthy, and eventually it gets sick. And that just happens through a process of light communication and quantum physical process. So, you know, that's a little bit more advanced and esoteric, but what I'm trying to say is, you know, you can purify things, but you have to energetically purify the water as well if you really want to create a healthy water. And normally nature does that by itself when it flows through aquifers and flows through the different layers of soil and sand and so on. Like in Amsterdam, where I had good friends, they had one of the best waters in the world, and they use sand filtration to filter it out. And it's one of the best filtration systems there, created really beautiful water. So before we created the latest high-tech things that is so enormously expensive, I would send a group of people and study some of the people in the world that have some of the best wastewater. In Sweden, they vortex the water and do things like that. And if we bring these technologies in, we could be a state-of-the-art treatment system and recycling system that would really improve the health of our population.
Yeah, one of the other things we're asking, you know, well, what we would be asking when we're on the board is, you know, joint venturing with the other cities, the other water agencies, and not take on projects by yourself that benefit the whole.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the sharing quality again, the connectedness of water. I mean, I'm so happy the two of you are connected and running a campaign together. That's at least the right attitude, you know, everybody having their ego going at it, you know, or having, you know, a feeling of scientific superiority when they haven't understand the whole picture, maybe only have a limited perspective and just listen to engineers. You know, I'm an engineer, I know how they think, but yeah, as a doctor, I think totally different about this, you know.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I noticed a couple of people have joined.
Karl, I would like you to go back into describing the homeopathic effect of the remnant tiny trace amounts, because that was a really salient point that I'm not sure you hit upon enough. Did you understand that, Maria or Corey, what he was saying about the homeopathic effect of that residual buildup in the pipes?
Yeah, it sounds like that if you put a little bit in, and I've said that too, it makes sense. Well, it's probably not going to be a big deal. But if you put it in over years and years and years, it does build up and it does affect the systems in the body.
Yeah, and those are still chemically measurable amounts. But in homeopathic medicine, which was originally, founded a long time ago by a German physician, and it's still practiced a lot more in Europe and in France. It's actually sold through the pharmacies, but in this country, it's considered alternative or not really proven, and we're in the
It's
process.
one of the true traditional medicines.
Yeah,
Actual traditional medicines, and never should we call Western that, because Western is the newcomer usurping and stealing. Sorry, just had to say that.
Samuel Hahnemann, who first discovered these things, they found that if you took something and diluted it again and again, a substance, that sometimes the illness that would be created by, say, a poison, and give you certain symptoms, when you diluted it again and again, oftentimes to below Avogadro's number, which is the number of molecules in water when you dilute it, where there's no more substance present, it still had a biological effect. In fact, it was often a counter remedy for it. It literally acted in a way to alleviate these symptoms. So the idea that in pharmacology, if you want to get a bigger effect, you get a bigger dose. In homeopathy, sometimes a very low level can have a significant biological effect. And so this is a more integrative medical approach to it. And what I'm saying here and suggesting, and obviously it hasn't been studied yet, but if there were to be some studies of this, you could take these micro doses of contaminants, even dilute them further and then give it to an animal or give it and see what kind of effects it causes. And that's, I think, the future where the new medicine is going that I'm more involved with. Do you understand? So, obviously for you as board members, you're going to have to go with saying, okay, there's a lot of micronutrients. Are we testing for all of them? Is it sufficient what we're testing? And do we need to let that water first go through a more natural process or through a vortex or some other treatment system rather than saying, okay, it's chemically pure, let's dump it into the groundwater supply.
Inject. Not giving it the chance to trickle down and clean the natural way is the insanity that Becky has nonstop brought to their attention, and they've just wholeheartedly ignored her. And wholehearted, that's the wrong word, but wholly.
This is the illness of Western thinking that technology will fix everything. Water is very special.
I have another question for you, Doctor. The Soquel Creek Water District owns what's called Granite Creek area. It's up near Scotts Valley. It's some large land available for percolation. They could stick the recycled water into that and let it percolate, correct?
Yeah, I think that would, that should be an experiment they conduct on at least a small level to see the efficacy of that, or, what does it do to the bacterial flora that was there before or after, or how does it change the contaminant levels? These are really great experiments that should be done,
And there are quarries like that all over the county. We understand multiple places. If we were just catching more of the rainwater instead of forcing it out through the storm systems, there would be not the problem that has been fomented by seemingly factions that have other interests in mind and not the people of this county.
The other resonance, if we think of these things as resonating, minerals grown in mineral depleted soil give us foods that are not high in minerals. And when the minerals tend to alkalinize your body, make it a more basic, less acidic, okay? And vegetables are important because they have a lot of minerals like that. But if you just take something like pure water and you flow it through rocks or through quarries, or they come in contact with all these minerals, they will give an energetic signature into that water that is very healthy for the water and makes a better quality water. That's why a lot of springs that spring out of the ground and have been in contact with the rocks and so on are such healthy waters. And, I hope in the future we'll be able to do some of these subtle energy testing of the water and say, what's this qualitative quality of this water? We're working with scientists in the Netherlands who have found out that these electromagnetic radiations make the water so weak, and it still contains all these high frequency resonances in the water that the water doesn't let plants grow properly, and they're working on remediation technology so the water can again support life energy or life force, or make plants grow. And in fact, we get much larger crops when we treat water energetically like this. So we could think of water as an information system that is a highly complex matrix, a highly complex interaction that ultimately can create not just a pure chemical water, but living energetic water that supports, and it doesn't allow bacteria to grow. For example, you can put water through magnetic systems. They sell them for plants, and then there's no more scale buildup in the pipes, and once you've installed it, it descales the pipe, the calcium carbonate that might be in the water. And so we have pretty hard water. So there's all these alternative technologies that, forward-looking water boards would say, let's create the best water that makes people, and if people pay this much for it, they should really get a bang for the buck,
Yes. Redirect all this money that's being spent to a healthier system, please.
So hopefully you'll get elected, and hopefully can
Yes.
advise you further and
Yes.
introduce you to new ideas that will make us, be a system that others want to emulate.
That's our
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah.
Alexandra, did you have a question?
Hi. Yeah, just tuning in here for a minute visually. I usually don't tune in visually to Zoom calls, so you'll have to forgive me. But I do sort of want to add a piece about effective microorganisms, because they've been being used for a long time to remunerate rivers and streams. They also actually, something I've discovered on my own, is actually also have direct effect on the human body through using it through when they're baked into ceramic. But I just want to throw that up because that's something that is technology that's being used right now for septic systems and for vegetable beds and for putting into paint that you would put on your wall to neutralize paint. I've used it for neutralizing tattoo ink before it goes into people's bodies. It's vibrational, and it is organisms that have been harvested from volcanoes. The Japanese know about this. It's harder to find information on that. I've been looking more myself recently. It's harder to find the actual scientific information about it these days than it used to be like 10 years ago. And if someone does find it, I'm curious to hear about it. But Karl, I think that you also know about that too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are these, unconventional technologies that, that we should do a risk-benefit analysis. Will they really help, And life is about interconnection, and interconnection happens through water. And so to me, water is sacred, not just the water that's stuck in the ground, that's fallen from rain. And we're actually changing. Well, my colleagues in Holland tell me that the water that now has to fall from in the rainy season here through the sky has to go through all this electromagnetic radiation that soon will be with laser light beams through 5G antennas directly hitting your cell phone and affecting you very directly. But it's also affecting and restructuring the water. So this is a whole new concept that most people who think about water, they only think of it as this H2O, but it's really information that you're getting through water. And certainly spinning it, vortexing it, treating it with ceramics that might be infused with information. Now we're getting into a whole realm that is well understood by people who look at it from a quantum physics perspective, because the quantum physics has found these anomalous things like the boiling point of water at 100 degrees centigrade and freezing at 0 degrees, and being most dense at 4 degrees centigrade, so that ice floats on top of water. That makes life possible. All of these things can be explained through the equations of quantum physics and not through just chemistry. So water is the most magical substance to me, and since we're made out of water, we might as well support our body the way I suggested, and that's your mission.
Mm-hmm. Can I say one other thing? I really want to just support what you're saying about live water and everything you've been saying, because I think there's just a huge lack of education about water being alive. People just, really take for granted that, open your tap, pour a glass of water, drink it, and it's just water. Water is water, but water is not water is not water. And that is one of the things too. One of the pieces about the effective microorganism is that it actually takes the molecule that gets fractured and disorganized on a chemical level, and it reforms it into its original hexagonal form so it can actually rehydrate. When it's not in that form, it cannot hydrate. So I just wanted to add that piece along with everything else you're talking about, Dr. Maret.
Yeah. So
That is really important to having, so what live water actually means and the lack of education around that.
yeah, that's great, Ms. Kaufman. That this water that's hexagonal, as I showed you in this picture when they crystallized it, there is such a thing called hexagonal water. It's very rich in these hexagonal clusters. And when you drink that water, it can get through special, membrane proteins in the cell. They're called aquaporins. There was a recent Nobel Prize given for that a couple of years ago. Aquaporins are actually water receptors. They're like doorways or gates inside your cell. And to get the water into the cell to keep you hydrated, you need to get that water of a certain structure and energetic quality through these aquaporin proteins. And that's what we see today is we see a lot of people have a lot of water in their body, but it's in the extracellular space around the cells, and it can't get through the doorway into the cells where you need it for energy production and for proper functioning. So yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, we could have a whole night discussion on this, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, the community so much needs to hear everything you're talking about, Dr. Maret. I mean, this is important stuff.
Yeah, and if
Okay.
only we had found open ears with the existing board members. Unfortunately, they have entirely refused all this information and help, despite that it's been offered with good heart and good mind and good community for many years. So that's the great hope that people will understand their soaring water bills can be addressed and their much greater health can be addressed by getting a couple of new people in on that water board, Soquel Creek Water District.
I voted for you both.
Thank
If you'd like the entire presentation, Alexandra, I'm recording it. So
Great.
it'll be on our website probably in a few days. It takes a while to download, etc.
We want to really promote it.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
I want to watch it all again, all the parts that I missed, because yes, I was watching the debates.
Well, we spent an hour, so we should probably wrap it up.
Dr. Maret, you were great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank you
very,
for
very
having
much. We appreciate all your time. And thank you, Alexandra and Karen and all the other people that have
Yeah,
joined.
everybody, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you
good
Take
night.
care.
very much.
Bye.
Yeah, all the best to you. To keep
Thank
knocking
you.
on doors or whatever you can do. We got to let everybody know you're the key to our future here.
Thank you so much.
I really
you.
hope you both get in.
Yeah.
I hope so too.
We do
Yeah.
too.
All right.
Just to say out loud, it's mandatory for the entire county that this debacle be straightened out, because the entire county is set up to suffer with the negative problems that have not been addressed all these years. And to keep going forward with an overexpensive project is quite criminal, when it means that all the existing people who live throughout this county, not just in Soquel Creek Water District, will wind up having another way that we're priced out of living here for no good reason whatsoever. So it's not just people in Soquel Creek Water District that we want to understand this. Every county community member has the same desire and ought to be calling every person they know in the Soquel Creek Water District to allow them to vote the two of you in, so that we have the benefit of what you can bring of a scientific perspective that has been ignored until now.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
want to also say one other quick thing. I know we have to leave, but Corey and I have been to speaking to various people, and they say, "Oh no, I have a well." I was like, "Well, this is going to affect you too in a very big way, because you're not going to test your water as much as say hopefully a water district will. But so I want to speak to all the well owners too, because I had a well for many, many years and I love the water, but it concerns me that we're injecting that into it, the unregulated.
Yeah.
Do me the favor too, Maria and Corey, both please speak to your backgrounds and your reasons for stepping up to run, because this may be the main way that people learn about you. Go ahead and fill in with that, please.
I'm a human resources person by trade. And so transparency, budgets are a very big, important thing for us because HR doesn't typically get the huge budgets. So I've managed them many, many, many years, been an executive. And so I'm very concerned about that the cost to our ratepayers and how it's going to impact them, as well as the environmental effects. That's huge to me. That was one of the main reasons that I ran. I'm very much of an environmental advocate, and so I'd really like to be part of the Soquel Creek Water District so that we can get things on track. We can get the budgets on track. We can make sure that we're presenting our ratepayers with the really high quality water that they deserve.
Yeah, my background's been with local government and working collaborative projects together with joint agencies, cities, water districts, utility companies, and alike, working with them on joint venture projects to better the whole area, not just one community. One project I did a long time ago was coordinating with a local water district out of this area, but it was a recycled water project that was benefit of the entire 11 city community and the adjoining water districts to recycle the wastewater into golf courses, landscape medians, and alike that then don't use the aquifer for irrigation, basically. But then also I've done other projects that are not water related, but also working with collaborative efforts with adjoining cities and efforts to joint venture projects that benefit the infrastructure and the transportation of water and getting it to where it needs to go but collaborative efforts by everybody joint pooling their funds. There are other counties and cities in California that joint pool their money through development impact fees that jointly together we can do projects together. Separately by yourself can't be done.
Right.
So,
Right.
Plus also being transparent and having budgets that for projects that are within budget, not taking out loans against loans against loans.
Both of you have really important qualifications for doing exactly what was brought up earlier, that we have to get to the place where this county is treated like the single waterway that we are. We have an aquifer that runs under multiple water districts for no good reason at all. We are connected by the water. We should be connecting through the water. The Soquel Creek Water District should have been courting Santa Cruz City for a long time in order to make sure that the marriage made in heaven of one having excess runoff and the other having excess storage could have just shared all this time and not had any of this needed. But we have to just accept this is where we are. This is underway. There may be future reasons why this was okay, and to pare back on that extreme cost, share it as needed, and to get to a better place with water in this county is something for every single person in this county to come together behind the two of you about. Thank you so much for putting your lives on the line this way.
Yep.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Dr. Maret. We really appreciate your
Thank you so much.
wonderful presentation. And thank you all for joining us.
All right.
Next week, we do have another presentation, and that's in progress. So check our website. It's katesandmarsilio.com. But thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Good luck.